Hello, everybody. Just a quick message. Apology for the digital artifacts you're going to hear during this episode. The platform we were using to record this gave us a lot of issues. There was a lot of digital static. You're going to hear this intermittently throughout this episode. We tried to fix it. We even tried AI. It did not fix it. We have switched platforms going forward, so there will just be this episode, and I believe the next one was recorded on the old platform as well. But we have switched it. We've tested it. It's working great, and hopefully it will not give us the issues that the old platform did. So here's hoping this will be the last of it, give or take. There might be one more episode. We're going to see how well that episode recorded once we get there. But thank you so much. Bear with us. This is a new show. We are learning, but enjoy this episode. It is actually really fascinating. We are comparing two Godzilla movies, two different expressions of the same franchise between two different cultures, and how that compares to how two of the same wines express themselves differently between two different cultures. So we hope you enjoy. Thank you so much. We'll catch you on the next episode of Wine and enjoy this one. Welcome, everybody, to Wine and, the show where we pair wine with books, comics, music, movies, and TV, as one does. Most of the time, we're going to be discussing things we love. Sometimes we'll dissect something that we hate. But whatever it is that you love, whatever it is that you hate, there is a wine that pairs with that. And if you like what you heard today and want to hear more, make sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. It helps the podcast grow. And leave a review, 5 stars, no less. You know you love us that much on Apple iTunes or any other platform that allows reviews or scores. Going forward, we will be reading out loud on the show any reviews left for us. So make sure you write something you're okay with us sharing.
Right.
Positive, negative, doesn't matter.
Some reviews.
Positive, negative, doesn't matter. We're sharing. And then other listeners can share their reviews of your reviews as well. I think that's fair. And today we are joined by the one and only Striker Reese. And if ever there was an action hero / comic book name, Striker motherfucking Reese.
That's right.
Striker is the founder of Anime and Wine, a website and blog where he explores the intersection between the two and regularly has fun pairing them together. Striker has a background as a wine marketer, a wine scholar, and is WSET Level 2 certified in wine and spirits. For those of you who are unaware of what the WSET is, it is a certification / test that you can take in the wine world. It goes up to 4 levels, level 1, 2, 3, and then diploma level. And Striker is at level 2. And just to put that a little bit into context of how hard these bloody tests are, the level 4 diploma, there are only about 13,600-ish people in the world with the diploma certification. So that's in the world, which holds billions of people. So that ain't that many people. So it's pretty high up there. So Striker, first off, welcome to the show. I'm thrilled to finally be talking to you digital face to digital face. And please let our listeners know what made you get into wine in the first place and why start Anime and Wine.
So funny story. I'm from South Carolina, but I went to grad school in DC. And as you can imagine, the scene in DC is a lot different from the South Carolina. So I was just kind of around wine and around like fancy people and political people. And I was like, okay, well, I kind of like this. So I'm gonna kind of go with it. So that was really it. It was like spur of the moment. I was gonna go with it, and I did. So
What
here I
area
am.
in South Carolina is your family from?
Columbia. Yeah, like right in the capital. Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Because my part of my family is from Columbia.
Well, they
East
probably
Coast.
know me. We probably know each other at some point.
Do
It's
we?
a
I don't know.
small.
I'm very
It's
bad with faces and memory.
it's
So
a small. It's a small place. So someone's
where'd
family
you go to high
probably.
school?
I went to Spring Valley. Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah,
I live near Spring Valley. All
yeah.
right. All right. All right.
It's a small world. It's a small
Fantastic, man.
world.
And
Fantastic.
hysterically, Dallas
And
then
we
went
lived in
to the
DC.
Northern
Actually, we
Virginia
Yeah,
area. Yeah.
yeah. I love DC.
Yeah, DC is great. One of my favorite cities on the entire planet.
Yeah,
Entire planet. Truly, just a fantastic place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good deal.
And Yeah, I was gonna say, I think because Dallas has his SC roots, and then Northern Virginia. Me and
Mm.
Dallas both lived in Northern Virginia for a long, long time. Did not know each other then either, or there, but then met later in LA randomly. So yeah, we're a Northern
Yeah.
Virginia DC trio here, and then man, okay. So anime and wine. Why anime and wine for you?
You know, everyone kind of does the super fancy thing in wine.
Yeah.
That's
Hmm.
kind of the standard, the luxury thing. And I was like, you know what? That's not necessarily my personality. So everyone kept telling me, well, you know what? Do whatever you want. Like if you go
Yeah.
left, you might as well go crazy as you want. So I was like, okay,
Absolutely.
well, I've always liked wine, anime. So why not? Why not do it? And no
Not.
one else is gonna do it. So why not? I'll do it then.
Good deal. How long ago did you start
That's
the
awesome.
wine and
And
anime?
It's funny. I had the idea for this in 2017
Okay.
and never did anything with it.
Oh yeah.
Like I kept procrastinating it
Yep.
and it was just in like doubting myself.
Yeah.
So I was just like, no. So for this past like year, I've been kind of going harder on it. So
Good
really
deal.
this past year, but I've had the idea for so long.
Good deal. Hell yeah.
that is awesome. Yeah, yeah.
Very
And that is animeandwine.com, exactly as it's
yeah.
spelled, exactly as it sounds. That's where you can find it. It's and he also has Instagram account, Twitter account that are both very much worth following to keep up with that. Yeah, I think me and Dallas had very similar ideas. Like we both got into wine also not through the wine world,
Mm,
really. We both had our own personal journeys, just kind of getting into it and
yeah.
discovering that we loved it and wanted to get deeper, learn more about it, because we're both obsessive compulsive personalities. And it's like
Totally.
once we've hooked, and you're into anime too, so it sounds like you're probably not too dissimilar in that. Like if you're going to become a fan of something, it's like all
Yeah.
in, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And but then of course you get to know the wine world. And as much as I really appreciated learning, like I follow tons of podcasts, lots of wine writers, and they're all, incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly giving of their time and all that fun stuff in their own ways. But then I was like, it's all the same. And
Yeah.
it's kind of all, yeah, yeah. I was like, what else can we do with wine? I mean, and they talk a lot about how wine is this thing that's been around for like most of human history. It's one of the oldest techniques in terms of food and beverage known to man. Obviously humanity's been obsessed with it for almost its entire existence of being cultures. And so I was like, okay, so this should be everywhere. This should be more, have more to do with everything to the
Mm,
best of our ability. And yeah, I think we just approached it from a similar angle where it's like, well, drink wine while reading, while watching things, while consuming other media. And I often try to match, even before I really knew what I was doing, before I understood that it was like pairing per se. I feel like pairing might even be too strong of a word. We've gotten
mm,
Yeah.
really into the concept, but a
Yeah.
lot of the times you're just like, what mood am I in? I'm in the mood to watch this and drink this. And that means something because it matches the same mood, right? And so it's almost like you're naturally pairing it without even trying. But yeah, there's so much fun that can be had with
mm.
wine, and it's so not fun most of the time in the wine universe. It's so very streamlined, straightforward. And again, this is coming from someone who's a fan of all that stuff
Yeah.
too. It's just like, okay, great, that, but more. And I think as well that the wine world is suffering its own crises of like young people aren't drinking wine and they can't connect
Mhm.
with young
Yeah.
people. And it costs a lot to get into wine for them comparatively.
Ooh.
You
Ooh, yeah.
the price per bottle, and then that bottle doesn't last. You're going to be able to, you open it and you're like, and you got a day or two. It's not like buying a bottle of tequila where it's like you can
Mhm.
nurse that thing for as long as you want, so you get your value out of it. But all right, so today we are here, Striker's Pick. We are here to talk about two Godzilla movies. We are going to be talking about Shin Godzilla from 2016, the Japanese film. It was basically Shin Godzilla was the beginning of the current quote unquote era of Godzilla, because they're all broken into eras. And so this was before, and then Godzilla -1, the one that has just been in theaters and has yet to be released in the West on any sort of streaming or home video yet. So I have not seen Godzilla -1. I don't think Dallas has either. Did you ever see Godzilla -1, Dallas?
No, still haven't. I had the opportunity to go to a screening here, but
Okay.
I did not. No.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still on the list. For sure.
We won't be able we won't be able to speak intelligently, at least me and Dallas won't, on the similarities or distinctions between Shin and -1. Stryker might, and please feel free, Stryker, if you have anything to say on that.
I think he has
But
opinions based on that nod.
I bet. So, but we're going to be talking about it in relation to the American MonsterVerse and Godzilla movies that have been taking off. Now, I and Dallas also have not seen the latest Godzilla X Kong, the new empire.
Oh yeah,
New
yes,
Kingdom.
I saw that.
Yeah. Oh, you saw that? Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So I have not.
Insanity,
so I can only
saw that one.
Yes. So, but we are going to talk about the first Godzilla Kong, Godzilla
That's
versus Kong, by the same director, Adam Wingard, from 2021, because those we were able to stream in preparation for the pod. And the idea today is we're going to talk about the similarities and the differences between the two, and we are going to pair them with wines that express themselves differently for different reasons. You can do that in a couple different ways. They can be from, just like the Japanese Godzilla versus the American Godzilla, they're from different places. And so how do grapes express themselves in different terroirs, in different soils, in different climates, or different winemaking techniques? Maybe they're from the same place, but the technique is completely different. That could be something we might do today as well. We don't talk about this in advance in terms of who's bringing what to talk about, so we might surprise each other. But the idea is to have fun with that. But to start us off, these two Godzilla movies, what have you, Stryker, kick us off? Had you seen these two before? I'm going to assume yes, but have you seen these two before? And what were your impressions of both of them the first time you saw them?
Yeah, so I've seen both of them. I've seen Shin Godzilla. I kind of rewatched it maybe a month or two ago. First impressions, Shin Godzilla is a very long watch. You have to be like locked in to watch it because it is a lot of dialogue where it's just scenes where they're just talking.
Yeah.
So if you're not that kind of person that likes like heavy dialogue, that one may not be for you. Godzilla versus Kong, like if you like just fighting special effects, people, big giant monsters going at it, that one's probably for you. So I like them both, but I like them both for different reasons. But I always tell them it's just like pairing wine. Like it really starts on your own personal like preference
right.
and taste.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Essentially,
Dallas, how
what you
about you?
bring to the experience. I've always been a pretty passive kaiju fan. If there's the notion or the sort of suggestion of kaiju, I'm probably going to check in. Even if it's for me, I like to call that whole kaiju kind of sphere. What was the phrase? I wrote it on a short story like 6 months ago. Eye roll cinema. It's my favorite eye roll chuckle cinema. Because you inevitably come across a moment that is so stupendous or so ridiculous that you have to roll the eye, but you're in it, so you end up just sort of chuckling into the moment, saying, "That's why we're here. That is why we are here." So in terms of sort of kaiju sphere, yeah, I'm all in general. I've always been a fan of the Godzilla IP. I loved the 90s American version. I loved it.
Do you
Loved it.
really?
Loved it.
Wow,
because
talk about eye roll cinema. You must
exactly.
be in eye roll cinema.
It epitomizes eye roll. That's precisely the point. It epitomizes eye roll chuckle cinema. With Shin Godzilla, I was so excited when I was walking down Hollywood Boulevard, and in Hollywood they do this, and probably do it in most big cities, but they pay these plasterers to go and just plaster up these old school posters for whatever's coming out on any buildings that are boarded up. I'm sure it happens in most cities, but it really happens in LA. And so they had this like 20-foot tall poster of the Shin poster, and the poster pulled me in. I was like, all right, yeah, that's going to be crap maybe.
Yeah.
But then I started reading up on it. I was like, oh no, this is I'm excited about this one. So I was thoroughly excited about that one. The excitement in relation to GVK had more to do with coming out of lockdown. I was just ready to go see something just blasphemously large and explosive in the
Big and
theater.
dumb and loud in
Absolutely.
yeah.
And generally, I'm not, I have to be in a certain mood, but I love that kind of stuff. So it had been a while, and I had very low expectations. I knew going in this was going to be theme park cinema rather than anything else. I knew going in that they were launching. They were trying to launch a new theme park ride with this film. That's how it feels, at least. So yeah, that's kind of my sort of connection to it. What about you, Dave?
Cool. So for me, fun fact, the last couple of years I've been rewatching all the Godzillas from the OG, straightforward. I had never really seen most of the Showa, and if I'm pronouncing any of these Japanese titles wrong, I apologize. I do not know how to say them. But Showa, whatever it is, the 50s all the way to the late 70s is that first era of Godzilla, and I got the Criterion collection of that set where it was like, the entirety of the Showa era, and I was like, okay, I'm all in. Let's do this. And I'd seen the OG Godzilla before. I had seen like one or two of the other really campy 70s Godzillas just at total random, whatever was on TV. Yeah, they're great. Well, and it's funny, I was really happy that in the American movies they named King Ghidorah Monster Zero again, because that was one of my favorites of the old ones, the Monster Zero, which was almost not a Godzilla or even a kaiju movie, to be honest. It was one of those things where it was supposed to be this big kaiju war, and they are in it for like maybe 5 minutes. It's hysterically not a kaiju movie, and they just have. But the story was what was actually stunningly good. It was an alien invasion. The aliens were wild. It was like a complete Ray Bradbury or I don't know, some Isaac Asimov kind of like old school pulp sci-fi yarn that just happened to feature a couple minutes of kaiju here and there. Kaiju were like part of the plans, but they didn't do anything in the movie. And yet I loved it. It was one of my favorites. And people forget the Monster Zero thing. And I loved that it came back in the Americans. Anyway, long story as short as humanly possible here. I made it all the way to the middle of the Millennium era. And that's where I had kind of left off. I was at like 2002, 2003, and I haven't seen past that yet. And then Stryker came in and was like, let's do Shin Godzilla and Godzilla versus Kong. And I was like, shit, okay. I got to jump. No way I'm watching all of those to get, all the way caught up. So I have jumped. I still haven't seen the movies in between yet, but I will. I'll catch up eventually. But it was really interesting watching these two, both for the first time for me, having just waited through over the last couple of years, very slowly but surely, the entirety of Godzilla's history in movies. And in my brain, I feel like I have a lot of context to compare these two things to because of that. A few fun facts, just to throw them out there, because we're talking about Godzilla that I love that most people don't realize. Number one, the OG Godzilla from 1954, that Godzilla to date did die in the original Godzilla. He's never come back.
Yeah.
Most people don't realize that.
That's
in
true.
all the reboots, the remakes, the sequels, the everything. That's so the very first sequel, Godzilla Raids Again, they say, no, the oxygen destroyer did actually kill him. This is some other member of Godzilla's species that we're now rechristening Godzilla in his wake. And all the 60s and 70s movies are that Godzilla, the second Godzilla that we meet. And that second Godzilla, it lays eggs. It always has a son of Godzilla somewhere down the line. It's a she. It's not a he. Only the first Godzilla was the he.
Or it's an asexual regenerative.
Or it's hermaphrodite, something like that. Yeah. Right, exactly. But it's not a straight up he one way or the other. And And it's not the OG Godzilla. We never, even in Godzilla 1984 or 1985, depending on if you're watching the American or Japanese one, which was the Heisei era reboot of the 80s and 90s, which is one of the best eras ever. It's such, Dallas, if you want eye roll cinema, but that is actually just so, oh my God, I love that era.
It's good.
It's incredible. But they even end that era with this monster called Destroya, which was created based on the Oxygen Destroyer that did, in fact, kill the original Godzilla. So they stuck with this, the Godzilla killed by that Oxygen Destroyer throughout all these different reboots. And so I mean, I think by this point in time, no, it's finally in the past. All these new Godzillas are kind of like fresh reboots that have nothing to do with even the OG Godzilla. But we've never seen, that being said, we've never seen the OG Godzilla ever again in all of these movies, in all of these everything. It's always been something else. So I love that as a fun fact to throw out there. But for these movies, Shin Godzilla, I will say we're going to talk more at length about Shin Godzilla here in just a minute. But, Shin Godzilla is done by the Neon Genesis Evangelion guys, right? It's
Same composer
Hideaki
too.
Anno.
Yeah.
Oh, and so it's the two directors are both from that franchise. Hideaki Anno is, of course, the director creator of Neon Genesis, and Shinji Higuchi was the storyboard artist for all of Neon Genesis stuff, working very closely with Anno. And he also was the visual effects artist on the 90s Gamera films. So he did all the VFX on those. Those are the Gamera of the universe films that people who are into kaiju, they swear by those as some of the best ever made. And so he was the VFX artist on those, and then came and co-directed this with Anno for this version of Shin Godzilla. And man, does it look and feel like an episode of Neon Genesis.
A part of the heavy lifting of that is done by the composition, by the score. Because
do you think by the score? I'm not
saying it is all attributed to that, but part of Evangelion, part of that whole series, part of the emotional connection to that is the score. I mean, it is truly part of the underpinning of your emotional journey with that film, and I think the same can be said for Shin Godzilla, because it does go off into a different, much more serious tone than a lot of the other.
Absolutely.
Godzilla.
Well, and for me, the
Shigasu, I think, is the composer's name. Shigasu.
Yes. And for me as well, just the visual compositions, right? Like, I swear this thing is storyboarded to a hilt, just like an anime, where all still shots of just people walking, then stopping, then talking, but in this big vista in the background. And then the way the play of light and shadow, you can tell that someone storyboarded this. And when they were then ready to shoot the film, just like the Wachowskis were infamous for this, where they would storyboard the shit out of their movies. And then when they made them, that was the Bible. They weren't like, oh, but we're still going to just find the shot. They're like, it's like, this is what we're watching to a T, go. And that's what we're capturing. And I feel like this happened here as well, where they were like, these are the shots. And when the poor cinematographer came in, they're like, hey, guy, just do this. Like, please don't step outside the lines. And they got those exact shots. And everything about it, even that long, as Stryker mentioned, it's a long watch. It is. The moment I imagined it as an anime, it worked so much better for me, where I just imagined this was cartoon and not live action. And I was like, yeah, these are anime shots. This is exactly how it's slow when it's slow. How it's violent and horrifying when it's violent and horrifying. Like, they were doing live action anime in a way that was almost eerie in how exact it was a live action anime. And in live action Neon Genesis style, where like those giant kaiju creatures or robots or what have you are kind of terrifying and eerie and
just
weird.
In scale alone, they're just terrifying.
Yes.
It is definitely a live action anime, and you can tell it needed storyboarding because they had a lot they were trying to accomplish with this goddamn film.
Yes,
they had a lot they were trying to accomplish with this film. Not only sort of in terms of the legacy of, because they take this, the culture takes this stuff seriously. And
Hmm.
they, particularly with Shin, I was really impressed by how they wove in this sort of socio-political kind of textures that were happening in the world at the time, with the reactor and the earthquake and the sort of nuclear parallels, and it was just a whole bunch of stuff that they were weaving into this film, and it's like, all right, this is a massive undertaking. And then to make it feel like a live action, because it does. It feels like a live
Hmm.
action
Mhm.
anime, down to the shots, down to, as you were saying, Striker, about the exposition and the sort of the conversations between characters.
Yeah.
Sometimes, in particularly in Evangelion, you might get a 7-minute long sort of interaction between two characters,
Hmm.
and you're like, I really don't want to watch this, but it gives me so
Right.
much in the moment, and I need the exposition.
Right.
And here the hell we
Right.
are. So, yeah, they do a damn
Right.
fine job of making
Yeah.
it feel like true, authentic live action anime.
Yeah. And the same way that they would do, like, you'd have an action-packed episode followed by like no action, like literally not a second of
Yeah.
anything exciting, in the next episode, where it's just people very solemnly and somberly sitting and discussing the
Mhm.
trauma of what just happened
Right.
and what might be happening in the future. And yeah, that ebb and flow where it's like it's huge ebbs and huge flows for
Yes.
lengthy stretches of time. And I think that might have thrown a lot of people. I believe the reception of this was still mostly positive.
Yeah.
But I
Oh
can
yeah.
see why -1 is more visceral. Like people are just like, this is the most exciting fucking Godzilla, like violent and yes, Godzilla movie I've ever seen. Whereas Shin is like, huh, I,
There's a
I don't
there's a
know what I think about
contemplative
this, you know?
Yeah, there's a contemplative kind of nature to Shin, like, because you are forced to consider a lot of the themes. Like, you're forced to sit and consider the ramifications. You're forced to consider. There's a great shot when the cars are rolling in on the water and things are sort of going to pot. It looks just like the images of the reactor, the tsunami. And
Hmm.
it was a haunting thing, because that was what, 2011, I guess. Um, and
Yeah.
a lot of the information you read about the response to the film, that's
Yes.
apparently one of the triggers. Apparently, it triggered a lot of
Right.
people,
Right.
because they spent so much time dealing with the aftermath of this kind of walking nuclear disaster that Godzilla
Right.
is, and its sort of the resulting impact on the city and the people.
Right.
And that's
Now,
all to say they had a whole hell of a lot of heavy lifting to get done with this film. So
yes. Yes. And on the flip side of that, let's talk about I'm going to quickly, because I still haven't said my background on the American one. So
yeah.
I had seen the 2014 first Gareth Edwards Godzilla in the theaters back in the day.
Oh yeah.
I'd never seen anything since, though. The Gareth Edwards one, I'm a fan of Gareth Edwards as a director in general. He got the Godzilla gig based on an indie film called Monsters that he did.
Uh-huh.
Prior to that, I don't know. Striker, have you ever seen the movie Monsters?
I
To
don't
your
think
knowledge?
so. Who stars in it?
No
Oh,
one of
no one.
note.
Okay. Okay, I didn't
It, yeah, it's
Okay.
basically a mid or maybe low budget film, but it's done so
It was
well.
under 1 million. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
less than 1
it's
million.
I
Yeah.
do recommend it if monsters are your thing, or sort of that anime
Yes.
parallel. It is done really well, and like Dave said, he got the gig off this film because, one, it's very difficult to finish a film, to get a film made. Two, it's difficult to get a film distributed, particularly back then. Three, it's difficult for that resulting film to actually be good. So he managed to do all three, and he got the Godzilla gig based
Yes.
off that $1 million film.
Yes, and it was giant kaiju monsters in the background, sometimes on screen. It was, he had a very low budget, and it was purely guerrilla made. He never
Yeah.
got filming licenses for any of it. So it was him and his crew, like in the jungles of, I'm gonna forget the country they shot this in, but it was one of the Latin American countries, and they were not allowed to do any of it. They had to kind of like make sure no one caught them filming, that they were doing it all guerrilla style. And then he was a special effects guy, so he could then take the footage and he knew what he was doing to put the kaiju in later. And the movie was basically a vaguely post-apocalyptic movie where these kaiju had emerged. The government was desperately trying to kill them, and it was just followed these two people trying to survive the event. And it turns out the thing that kind of bothered me about the Godzilla movie is he lifted the plot from Monsters and just made it into Godzilla. And I was like, wait, this is the same movie with Godzilla included. And I was like, that could have been a studio thing, or like, we literally want you to do that here and just add. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to blame him.
I'm going to go with
Yeah, it might have been.
It's very unlikely he had power in that situation, so he likely had an edict. And
is this a found footage film? It sounds like found footage.
Not really. No, no one's filming it. No, it's not found footage. No one's filming. There's no. It's not a concept where someone is filming. But it is Again, it was guerrilla style, so there's a little bit of like shaky-ish cam, a lot of fog. Like
shaky cam. We'll go with shaky cam. Yeah,
go shaky cam. But it's not the concept isn't that someone's following them, filming them, or anything. But the thing that was similar about the two is in the 2014 Godzilla, there's two other kaiju that are trying to mate, where Godzilla, and that's what everyone's trying to stop. And that is the story of Monsters, is these two kaiju. The government's trying to kill them, and then it turns out they were just in love and wanted to have sex, basically. And it was almost a weirdly heartwarming ending for the and you're like, ah. And then they took it in a more monstrous direction for Godzilla, where there was nothing heartwarming about those two kaiju. It was still the same plot, and it was a weird reintroduction of Godzilla, I found, where I was like, I feel like they needed a more streamlined story to be the first Godzilla movie. That said, I did watch everything of the American movies to prepare for this podcast. So I watched the 2014 one again. I watched King of Monsters. I watched Kong Skull Island, and I watched Godzilla v Kong the first time, or Godzilla versus Kong for the first time. That's a lot. It's a shit ton of fun. I mean, it was totally ass end different from Shin Godzilla. I liked them quite a bit. Are there flaws? Are there some? They're very American. They're very formulaic in their way, but also while peppering in a few new ideas and a few new things that we hadn't really tried before. But they were creating a monsterverse, and I think they did it well. Like the way they kept continuity between movies, the way they wove it all together, all the way until the big crossover between Godzilla and Kong. I was like, yeah, golf clap. Good job, guys. This is good. Like I'm loving everything you do. And Godzilla v Kong was directed by Adam Wingard, who also, like Gareth Edwards, comes from a super indie background. He did his first film for $2,000, a feature film. It looks like it was made for $2,000 now. Don't get me wrong. It was very, very indie, but he worked his way very slowly up that ladder. And he had a co-writer. So his very first films, ultra indie. The first one that I think is really worth seeing is a movie called The Horrible Way to Die. And it was the first movie he did with a writer called Simon Barrett, who they are still a creative team to this day. And they did the second Godzilla versus Kong together. They were not allowed to do it together for the first one. The studio already had a script, and Adam Wingard just got to direct it. Though a fun fact, Adam Wingard was up for the Kong Skull Island movie originally until it switched studios, and then he got dropped and they went with another director. But then they brought him back finally for the big crossover, and he does do an incredible job with it. And then from what I hear, though I have not seen the second one yet, the Godzilla X Kong, that is more him and Simon. That's like their vision. That's them being them. Whereas the first one, they were, yeah, they were a little more in check because it was a studio script. They didn't get to write it. They just had to make it. Whereas the second one, they're like, now we get to do our thing. And I'm so excited for this. I just want to throw this out there. Their next project, as of right now, is Face Off 2.
Yes. Which actually scares the shit out of me. But
what are they gonna do? Like, where is it to go?
So here's the best part about that. They convinced the studio that it will be John Travolta and Nicolas Cage coming back to reprise their roles.
It better be.
Again. Yeah. Well,
And I want
here's the
them
thing: the studio.
old, and I want them. I want it to
Mhm.
be absurd. It needs to
But
be
here's the
absurd.
thing: it took them years to convince the studio to do that.
Oh yeah,
One, the studio thought, "Who wants those two guys?" And they wanted a remake. They wanted a reboot.
yeah.
Oh
And it
no.
took them. I think they said it was Top Gun Maverick, doing so
Yeah.
well that convinced them. Oh, which is weird because it's Tom Cruise, the guy who could still do box office. I'm like, that
Yeah.
doesn't actually make sense that will
Yeah.
change their minds. But okay, whatever. Whatever gets us Face Off 2 with Nicolas Cage and John
Exactly.
Travolta, I'm all for it. I'm scared, but at the same time, Wingard and Barrett, I feel like there's a strong chance they'll
They'll
do
get it
well
done.
by it.
They'll get
It'll
it done.
be wild. Yeah, yeah. Stryker, are you a fan of Face Off, the first one?
I am, but I'm still curious on how they're gonna make a sequel. I feel like a studio, what they'll probably do is like self-insert some like new Hollywood person
Oh,
in it.
it's all about their kids. You
Yeah,
know,
it's
it's
like the
about their children.
detective or something, or
Yeah,
and they'll get away from what people actually want to see from
100%.
it. So
100%.
that makes me a little worried.
Yeah.
But I'm also anything with Nicolas Cage, I'll check out because his
Every time,
movies are
without
insane.
fail. He's his own category, and I'm
Yeah.
here for it. He's his own category, and I'm here for it.
Yeah. I do think so. I listened to a podcast with the writer Simon where he was talking about this, and he was like, "Look, it's big shoes to fill. Like we're well aware. They're nervous about it too, which I think is a good sign. You know, they're not cavalierly like going into the project. They're like, we don't know if we'll knock it out of the park, but that is the goal, right? And
Right.
to be true, like to actually do a sequel, a proper sequel, and to make it work with that amazing first batshit movie that came out of nowhere and nothing like it has ever really been seen since. That perfect blend of East and West, Eastern style filmmaking and Western style filmmaking that, it's because it's the one John Woo Western movie that worked at that level where
Mm.
everything else, it's like it works up to a point, but then you can feel the weird mesh of the East-West elements where it's like they're not quite gelling. And Face Off is just its own beast. It's like it
Yeah.
really became a hybrid new style that you could see the West, you could see the East elements, the influences, but then it was just its own movie. And God, I love it so much.
Yeah,
We'll
fantastic
see.
film.
So let's talk about, before we talk a little bit further about the movies, let's talk about the wines, because these are two vastly disparate movies. They are nothing like each other, even though they are, what's the word I'm looking for here? I'm not going to think of it. But they are ostensibly, there we go. They are ostensibly Godzilla movies.
Yeah.
But they are coming
Yeah.
at it from two very different angles, with two very different cultures that have very different things they want, I think, from Godzilla, and that
Different
they're trying to
expectations,
explore.
different palette, different everything. Yeah.
Yes. So what they're even trying to make are very different things. So Stryker, kick us off here. What would you pair with these two movies? What is that gap for you in relation to wine?
Yeah, so with Shin Godzilla, how I like to think of it is like a late harvest Sauvignon Blanc.
Hmm.
Uh, for the fact that Shin Godzilla, kind of the thing that captivates people is he goes through different forms.
Yeah.
And his
Yeah.
late form is kind of the thing that, that's kind of really popular. Like he's like this horrifying monster thing. So
Right.
how I like to think of it is something late in the production process, right? So
Hmm.
that's how I like to think of it. A late harvest kind of wine. How I like to think of Godzilla versus Kong is like I don't like to say regular Sauvignon Blanc. That doesn't, make much sense. But more like a standard Sauvignon Blanc because when people ask me, I like Sauvignon Blanc. Well, what kind do you like? Do you like a herbaceous Sauvignon Blanc? Do you like it from X
Mhm.
place or Y place? It's a wine that really kind of takes on where it's from. So that's how I kind
Mhm.
of like to think of it when it's this Americanized version versus, an Eastern version. So it really kind of depends on where you're from, kind of the style, and that's how I kind of like to think of it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yes. Strong whiff of urine with the American version, right? So that's always what they say about Sauvignon Blanc, which, ever since I heard that for the first time, I was like, oh God, yeah, it is kind of there, isn't it? It's always there in the at least in American styles of Sauvignon Blanc. It's always, I don't know about dessert styles. I'm trying to remember outside of Sauterne if I've ever had a proper late harvest, because Sauterne's its own version of that and usually has Semillon in there. But yeah, that's cool. So Dallas, what about you?
Yeah. So this one, what's crazy is I actually would not pair either of these with a wine. But for it's curious. This is so I had to I had to sit on it for a while, and then I decided that I wanted something which see, I had a whole thing about very specific beers to go with this film, which we may do a separate episode on later.
Go with the beers. Go with the beers,
man.
No.
We're doing one. We're gonna do the one.
Okay.
But I knew I wanted something that was complex in sort of two different ways, because I think while the idea of these films and the sort of base IP is very simple, the way they're treated is just two vastly different ways. One has this really almost austere, sort of delicate, treasured kind of sentiment to it, right? Shin, and it really requires you to kind of just sit with it and consider it. And on the other hand, you've got GVK, which is, like I said, sort of a theme park experience, right? It is so American, which is great and fantastic in its own way. And it's
I also love the hollow earth pulpiness of it all,
oh,
right?
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
It's just like it's that adventure movie. Yeah,
absolutely. Which is, again, that's the theme park thing. That's why I say when I saw this, it just looked like a giant origin ad for a great theme park ride.
The inverted gravity, that's got to be a ride, right? That thing where it spins you so fast that you get to lift off the ground or something like that. But I feel like there's something to be put you on wires and let you feel. There's got to be a great theme park ride in that.
100%. So for me, one thing that happened with this particular grape is, number one, the grape I chose is a very old grape. In general, the grape is often the most expensive grape you could find for mass volumes. It's also a grape I'm not terribly into. And
sell it, Dallas, sell it.
But it is great. Honestly, it's great. It's great. I knew I wanted something for Shin that was sort of coastal and sort of almost Pacific, if that makes any sense. I knew I wanted the sort of terrain I knew I wanted to come from a place that's kind of craggy and rocky, because you get a certain extra minerality from that. And I chose the Pinot Noir. I chose a Pinot. For GVK, I chose a Pinot blend from 4 or 5 vineyards within the same county, pure Pinot grape. And for Shin, I chose the Huia from Marlborough, New Zealand, which is a really kind of austere and savory and deep, and it's got everything you want from a Pinot, but it has a weird depth that it's not confusing, but it forces you to consider it, if that makes sense. Certain wines that automatically, when they hit the palate, where they are, what they are. They open up over time a little bit. Maybe they're sort of.
You're saying you would not guess this is a Pinot in a blind tasting kind of a thing, is?
I would guess it were a Pinot, but it's a Pinot with a little something extra.
Okay.
And I think that's what Shin is. It's a Godzilla movie with a little something extra. It's got some
All right.
heart, some really timely heart because of everything that was going on at the time, and the
Yeah.
nationalistic kind of pride that's in this movie. That it won. I think it won Picture of the Year or something at Japan's um,
Right.
Academy Awards. Uh, because of how personal it was at the time. So yeah, I love the Pinot. Again, not a grape I generally gravitate towards, but I think these two express in two different ways. And I chose the Bloodroot Pinot from Sonoma County for the GDK film.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Well, so I went, and Dallas will not be surprised by this. I have two examples of two things
of course.
that I'm going to throw out there because one is different terroirs and one is different winemaking styles, and they both really worked well. So the grape from two different places for me, I went with Tannat, and I had to do that because Tannat, it's a French grape originally, and in France, the big region for Tannat is Madeiran.
Right.
And Madeiran is the place where I have one bottle here. I mean, it's like this big, thick, black bastard of a bottle. It's just like it looks brooding, and the wine inside absolutely is. This is a 2016. I'm still sitting on it for a little bit longer. Tannat from the Madeiran, and this is the one that I would go with Shin, actually, it's you need to take your time drinking it. They took their time making it. They took their time releasing it. It is it is a brewing. It needs time for you to get used to it, for it to mellow, for you to understand what it is and what it's trying to do to you. When Tannat is this brooding, like the tannins are crazy, like they are not mellow in
God,
any way,
yes.
shape, or form.
Oof.
And I don't think like that's something with Shin too. Shin's got rough edges, and I don't mean rough edges in terms of the filmmaking. I mean in terms of like how much fun do you have with it? And you're not supposed to have like fun with it.
Yeah.
That's not the point of Shin. And so I'm like, what is a wine that I enjoy, but I do not have fun with? And man, Madeiran Tannat is that wine for me, where
Yeah.
it's all dark. It's dark, jammy fruit. It's sweet, quote unquote, but it ain't sweet. It is mostly savory. It's a lot of like black licorice and tobacco and like, spices like cardamom, and like they've got a little sting. They're baking spices, but they got a little sting to them. It's not gentle like cinnamon. It's the ones that like you can go a little too far with. And again, you need time for that integration. And I feel like Shin is one of those that you could rewatch and rewatch, and you got to give it some time to
Yeah.
fully appreciate what it's doing and how it did it. Um, and on Then there's Paso Robles Tannat. And Paso Robles Tannat is the OG place. So Tablas Creek is the OG place where Tannat vines came over to America in the first place. They didn't even ask for it. They had a French importer to get them vines to like start their vineyards. And one day they got these vines that were just extra, and they were like, "What are these?" And they had to call their French guy, and they were like, "Yeah, I did. I think you gave us these by mistake." And he was like, "Oh, no. I think those will do really well over there. Plant them, give them a shot." And they were like, okay. So they planted them, and they were amazing. Tannat grew so well in Paso, and Tablas Creek specifically has given the Tannat cuttings for Virginia, for Texas, for all the other states that have gone on to continue to make Tannat. Virginia, it's one of the prime red grapes of Virginia these days, and it's doing incredibly well over there. And American Tannat, it is so much, the tannins are weirdly mellow comparatively from the get-go, and it's fruit forward, which is not what the Madeiran Tannat is in any way, shape, or form. So it's just this like you can drink it young, you could give it time, it'll age well. It's got acidity, it does have the tannins. They're mellow, but they're there. It's got the tannins and acidity to age, but you don't have to. You can drink it now, and it's got tons of flavor, but it's all nice, juicy flavor. It's got some herbaceousness. It's got that zing of the acidity, but it's ready to go. And, that's an American film for you, right? That's an American kaiju film for you right there. It's like, don't think too hard. We're going to throw plot points at you. Please don't think too hard about those. Just keep going and have fun with this thing. It's a ride. It's a roller coaster ride. So those Tanats were ones that I thought. And then the other thing I thought of was Valpolicella from Italy, where you have three primary styles of Valpolicella. You have, of course, the Amarone, which is the king of those reds, where that is your dark brooding. It once again, like the Tanat, it needs time. You don't want to drink it too young. That is when they take, Valpolicella are two native varietals from the Veneto region in Italy. You don't really see them anywhere else in the world. Rondinella and Molinara. A couple other grapes can be peppered in there. They're allowed, but those are the two that always lead the way. And there are three kinds of Valpolicella: Classico, Ripasso, and Amarone. Classico is your young, fresh, ready to go, just like the Paso Tanat. That is your Godzilla versus Kong version, I think. You can go all the way to Amarone. How they make Amarone is they partially dehydrate the grapes. So they concentrate all those sugars, all those flavors, get rid of some of the water, then ferment them and make the wine. And it's rich because of that. The Ripasso, which is right in the middle, is a fascinating one. They take the skins they just used to make the Amarone, and they reuse them a second time to make the Ripasso. So Ripasso means second pass. And it's like using a tea bag a second time. So you're literally getting a weaker version of what you just made with the Amarone, and you're taking the Classico that you just made and then adding those skins of the that you just used for the Amarone and using them again. And honestly, I think Shin is the Ripasso, not so much the Amarone. I think the Amarone is just a little too decadent, and that's not really what Shin is either. The Ripasso is kind of like a dirty version of the Classico, where you're getting these like weirdly dirty savory elements, almost earthy, because again, it's like that it's like when you reuse a tea bag and it's weak. And so you're not getting some of those prominent flavors. You're getting almost like secondary characteristics out of the damn thing. And it's just, that's where Shin comes in, where you're like, ooh, this is interesting and I don't know what it is. It kind of gives me the shivers, but I'm into it. But not having fun. you're thinking about that thing because it's so odd. And yeah, Shin Godzilla, to me, it's an oddball movie of a Godzilla movie. I liked it a lot, but I got to think about it and I got to revisit it sometime in the past. So those are the two things. Those Valpolicella's, all the same wine, just made in different ways in those three different styles. So that's how they can be expressed, even if they're literally the same Valpolicella Classico. They're literally starting there and then, or taking those grapes that they grew in that exact region and then doing completely different things with them, and they all come out differently. So that's my expression of that. So on that note, I did want to say a couple last things, and then we'll see if we have last things we want to say about the movies themselves. One thing I wanted to say about Shin Godzilla that fascinated me is apparently there was a plan for a sequel.
Yes.
To Godzilla, right? So we saw 4 different forms of the Godzilla and Shin Godzilla kind of evolving from where we first saw it, right? And can I just say also, my favorite, I think, was form number 2, where he doesn't really have limbs yet. He's like writhing. He's got the eyes. He's got like the
he's a glowworm.
Oh, he's not bipedal yet, right? He's not standing on legs yet. He's just like squirming around and like skittering on these little stumps that aren't quite legs yet. And I'm like, that is my nightmare fuel right there. That just haunts me. But I love it in a good way.
It was.
And the googly eyes. I'm just like, oh my God, what is this thing?
Again, it was one of those sort of, it truly was one of those eye roll moments, because when it first appeared, I was like, oh God, what is this? And the more you stare at it, the more it does become nightmare fuel. Like, it really is so effective. It's so goddamn effective.
I didn't even have the eye roll moment. Evolution. It was nightmare fuel. Yeah, for me,
I love the idea of that's definitely an evolution in the storytelling and the narrative of the IP in general. The idea that this sort of evolution is happening within this sort of nuclear parallel, that is walking nuclear nightmare, which again is it's a little heavy-handed in the allegory and the sort of metaphor department, but it's so effective in this film. Like
He
it's
looks
so,
like he's in pain for
yeah,
like half
right,
the movie.
Yes.
right.
Yeah,
He's in
Yes.
pain, but he's forced to continue moving, which
That's a
is nice.
good
It's
yeah.
like a
point. Yes.
zombie. It's like a zombie. That's why zombies are so fucking terrifying, because they look like they're in pain, and the only thing that's going to solve their pain is eating you.
And
Yeah,
they don't even solve their pain. Technically, it's just all they can do. It's their only
yeah,
pleasure they have left,
yeah.
right?
For the moment,
Um,
right?
but there was a sequel planned with 4 more evolutions that Shin Godzilla was going to go through. So at the very end, if any of you were paying attention to that final shot of his tail when he was frozen,
Ah, right,
and there were those little like men-like things that were like weirdly spawning from the end of the tail, and
right.
that confused me. I was like, okay, I'm like,
Yeah,
it's a cool image. I don't know what I'm supposed to take from it. I'm like, but I guess that's the end of the movie. And apparently that was those little forms were going to become giant man-like beings that were going to be extensions of Godzilla that were
yes.
all going to spread across the world, from city to city. From there was then
Which I
going
really
to
want to
be
see. God damn it, I want to see
yes,
that.
Oh, I want to see that.
and it was going to go even further. Then there was this was all going to be in the sequel, 6th form. Not those forms could then self-regenerate and spread across the stars. They could fly, and they could survive the vacuum of space. The 7th form was a hive mind that across space, living in all different environments of all different planets, they were all still Godzilla, all in these different planets and all across the stars. And then the final, and essentially, and then and even then, and those forms could generate elements out of nowhere, essentially creating small galaxies within galaxies just on a whim. They could create their own. And the final form was becoming actual God. He would be omnipresent throughout the entire universe. He'd be a
Yeah,
part of everything in the universe, essentially a Lovecraftian entity that dreamed our universe as it
Yeah.
currently existed. And that was
that's
where it was
very
gonna.
much an anime. That's an
Yeah,
anime.
it's
Isn't
crazy.
it? Yes.
It really is. It really is. And I know they've put their production on halt, basically on hold, while
Yes.
MonsterVerse is sort of capitalizing. But I do see a world where they pick that back up, because that is, talk about an evolution in an IP. That becomes a new beast there. That's fantastic.
We'll see. I'm not sure. I don't think they'll pick it back up.
Yeah,
I think they let that one go. Nah. Godzilla -1. I think that's where they're gonna go. If they're gonna do a sequel, they're gonna do it
they're
to
lowering
that
the
at least.
bar so they can move back up to that. That's all that is. That's how
Oh,
you
you
restart.
think it's a lower of the bar? I still have to
Yeah,
see Godzilla
yeah,
-1,
yeah.
but we shall see. We shall see. All right. And then Godzilla versus Kong. Any last words on that one? I mean, we basically described in the energy of what it was, and that it was a really cool culmination of this monster verse. I'm not going to say it's not flawed. I'm not going to say it's not very American blockbuster. It absolutely is, but it's one of the well done American blockbusters. I think overall they've done a good job with the monster verse. Any final thoughts from you two?
Uh,
Yeah, so what's interesting about that first Godzilla, I think it was what, 2014,
yeah.
Uh-huh.
um, is -1, without giving spoilers away, basically did everything that that movie was criticized for,
Oh,
and it just basically did it well. So what that movie was criticized for, since you've all seen it, is what that Godzilla's not in it a lot. Like I
yeah.
think
Mhm.
they said a total of 5 minutes he's in the entire movie.
Yeah.
In -1, you don't actually see Godzilla that much. He's not in there.
Hmm,
One of the criticisms for that 2014 Godzilla was it focused too much on the human characters.
hmm.
Well, -1 focused on all the human characters. So it's interesting that sometimes it's not the way the storytelling is, it's just that
Right.
they just did it well. So
Right.
it's kind of funny how they did everything that that movie was criticized for. They just did it well, and the reception was completely different.
Yeah.
I'm going to tie that back into wine too, in terms of like, there's no bad grapes out there. There's no there's not
Yeah.
even necessarily a bad area or anything. It's just like, what are they doing? Are they doing it well? It might
It
not be your
depends on
palate. It might
whose
not be your
hands are
taste.
doing the doing. That's all. It
Hmm.
depends on whose
And
hands are doing
how
the doing.
hands-on, because certain climates too, you got to
Yeah,
be more hands-on to do it well.
right.
Whereas other climates, you need to be more hands-off
Like
to
this
let it
Pinot, like this
happen.
New Zealand Pinot. These guys, it is such a hands-on process. I mean, they have a really sort of austere production. They still have livestock roaming around the grapes. They're literally everything's done by hand. The yeast is original yeast,
Yeah,
and
Pin
every
Pinot is
process.
a great example of that because I know people in wine that will scream
Oh
that
yeah,
Pinot does not belong in X region. You can't grow it here. You
right,
can't grow it there. And
Right.
I'm like, really?
Right.
Like I've tasted wine everywhere and it's fine to me. But
it's fine.
if that's the hang up about it, okay.
Yeah, that's also the gatekeeping kind of industry
Yeah,
establishing,
yeah,
because once you establish a baseline, you can dictate who's outside of that
yeah,
baseline, right? It's a purity kind of idea, and
Right.
it's ridiculous because, as you said, it really is just about what's in the glass and what's on the
yeah.
palate, and your experience, what you bring to it. So, yeah. In terms of
Yeah.
Godzilla v Kong, though. Um, it is a nutty little film. It is. It is irreverent. It is again theme park establishing, and whenever the theme park does show up, it's going to be because of that film. It's going to be that film used as a blueprint. I think there isn't a whole lot of emotional core to the film, with the exception of Kong and the little girl. The other characters are basically like plot dropping or plot kicking devices. They're like, ah, here's that.
Exposition.
Here's that. There you go. Drop things into the room. I do think the final 30 minutes of GVK is, without question, I mean this. I mean this. In terms of the fight sequencing, in terms of this sort of inertia, momentum of the fights, it is quite possibly the best uh, fight monster sequence in the history
How'd you fight?
of cinema. It
Yeah.
is just ridiculous the entire time. I mean, for a full 30 minutes, I am rolling my eyes, just sort of, come on, and still just so deeply satisfied by the nonsense that they put on screen. Yeah.
I will
So
go with that. I will run with that. All right. Well, I know, Striker, you are limited on time today, so we will
yeah.
go ahead and wrap this up here. Even though, I mean, frankly, we could talk about the differences and distinctions of the Godzilla franchise, all these different movies, how the whole franchise relates to wine in terms of like,
Oh yeah.
you never have to give up on an idea in the wine world. I can't tell you how many times you mentioned how people wouldn't say like, you can't grow Pinot here, you can't grow Pinot there. Even when you think of things like orange wine coming back and like all the people that would not embrace it, and they're like, you can't, no one likes this stuff, right? You're lying if you say you like it. And it's like, I love orange wine. But I'm sure when it first came back, everyone was rediscovering how to make it and making it in new places with new grapes. And it's like, yeah, that's going to take time. And I wish the wine world was more, things take time, to find the right way. And especially in wine, where it's
That,
like you're comparing it to something they've been making for thousands of years in one place without ever leaving or changing. And
right.
you're like, well, that's better than this. And it's like, no shit, Sherlock. Like, this has
Yeah.
been being made for like, what, 5 years in this one new location now? It's like, let us support it just enough, like, be honest about it, but support it so we can get to the greatness. Because wine
Yeah.
is always that greatness, that potential is almost always there, and we just have to
Yeah.
find our way with it. I wish there was more support in the
Yeah.
wine world for those kinds of evolutions.
I think one
All right.
last sort of parallel comparison to Godzilla in the wine world is specifically when you go and you find a vintage, that the sort of terroir or the climatological issues were so severe that year that the entire year's output is just marred
Right.
by it. And you can go into these wine shops, these vineyards, and see the collection of 2016, 2017. And then there's always, inevitably, particularly with California wines, you'll find one that's $12 a bottle. Everything else is hovering around 60, but it's because that year the fires were so ridiculous that you can taste it in the grape, right? And even though it pales in comparison to all the other expert kind of expressions of that wine through the vintages and years, it's still its own experience. Its own experience. And I think that's parallel for the Godzilla films. Like, even the ones that you don't leave you completely satisfied, they're still a damn fine experience.
I think that's
On
the
the
first time someone has supported wildfire
Oh, I love the
scented
experience of it.
or hinted
Fire wine.
wine and accented wine, and being like, you try it first, don't judge.
Yes,
Try it first.
absolutely.
And I'm like, okay.
Absolutely.
No,
It's going
I'm
to
with you.
attune
I'm
your
with
palate.
you.
Absolutely.
That's new.
I like it. I like it. I like it. I'm just
All right.
surprised. I'm like, wow, no, I've never heard that. But see, even me being a proselytizer for that mindset, I was closed-minded about that. So we all have our
That's true.
we all have our
things.
our walls that we have to get through and whatnot. But
All right, let's
all
get
right,
Striker out of here.
folks,
Yeah.
thank you so much,
I have
Striker.
my hang-ups about
Tell
vintage.
everyone where they can find you online, please.
Yeah.
You can find me at Anime and Wine on Instagram and Twitter. I'm kind of there always. Just find me there.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much
Beautiful.
again, Striker.
And
Yeah.
links down below under this podcast in this episode. All right, folks. Thank you so much, Striker. Thanks for being here. And
That's
thanks to
right.
all our listeners for listening to Wine And. We'll be back next week with another wine and entertainment pairing for your entertainment. And if
Night,
you like
people.
what you heard today, once again, Dallas, I have a whole thing.
God damn it.
You
All
gotta,
right, hurry up.
just sit there.
Go,
sit
go,
there.
go, go.
I got a whole thing. No.
Go.
This is a proper podcast. You need to just wait and let
Oh.
the whole ending
Go.
happen.
Go, 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 go.
Okay. If you like what you heard today, in fact, I got to start over because I'm going to edit all that out.
Exactly.
Thanks for listening. Please stop making my job harder. You're not editing these things. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Wine And. Also, if you're on your phone, send us a quote-unquote text if you'd like. If you go to this episode page on whatever streaming platform you're listening to this episode from, you'll see a send us a text link right at the beginning of the episode description. Click on that. It'll open your text messenger app. Type your message. Send it right to us. And if you'd like to interact with us regularly, go to our Substack, wineand.substack.com. That link is down below as well. Some of the content is free, but the uncut episodes and ability to vote in polls, amongst other perks, are for paid members only. But check it out. Either way, thanks for listening, y'all. We'll be back with another Wine And episode next week. Bye-bye now.
Nice.